Hi, my name is Bente, I'm the Norse Witch, and this week's video is about foraging etiquette. And this idea stemmed from a comment, or multiple comments actually, on my video about dirts and dirt magic, where I mentioned something about getting dirt being the same as foraging plants. Some of you said, oh, what's that about? I don't know what you mean. So I thought, okay, apparently it is not common knowledge, and if something is not common knowledge, then I am making a video on it. So here we are talking about foraging etiquette. We are not only going to be talking about spiritual foraging etiquette, but also physical foraging etiquette. In my opinion, this goes deeply hand in hand, because if you want to be respectful towards, for example, local spirits and plant spirits on a spiritual basis, then you also have to be respectful on the physical plane. So these two go hand in hand, and that is why I decided to talk about both in this video. So in this video we are going to be looking at what you have to or should keep in mind when foraging plants, but not only plants but also other things like animal remains, or like dirts, as I already said, or stones. So a lot of different things. A lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about in this video apply to more than just plants, but of course some of it is specifically about plants. And yeah, with that being said, let's hop into the video. Okay, first let us talk about physical foraging etiquette. The first thing that I would like to mention is that a lot of countries have some kinds of foraging laws. So I of course won't be able to tell you about the laws in your specific country, but there are laws in different countries that apply to foraging. So things like where you can forage, what you can forage, sometimes you need licenses, etc., etc. So of course the first thing that you should do whenever you want to forage for plants, but also mushrooms, for example. I don't think this applies to more witchy things like stones and bones and things like that, because people probably don't really think that you will be going around picking those up. But whenever you want to forage for plants or also anything edible, there might be laws that apply. So you should check those first to make sure that, first of all, legally everything is fine that you're doing. And then of course comes the question of where to forage. Don't forage on anyone's private property. I think that should be a given for anyone. Don't trespass so that you can go somewhere to forage a plant. Don't go into someone's garden, and also don't go onto a farmer's field, for example, to forage. That is illegal. We don't do that. But also there are of course protected areas like national parks and areas like that, where either you need special permits to be allowed to forage, or it's just in general not permitted at all. So definitely check that, especially in Germany. A lot of the bigger, wilder, natural areas, a lot of them are national parks, and you're not allowed to forage there. So definitely check that first. So any kinds of protected areas, those of course are out of the question. And then there are also some areas where it would be legal, but maybe you shouldn't. And that always depends, I think, on what you want to do with the plants. If we're talking about anything that you want to consume, for example, then of course foraging near a busy road or also near the edges of fields, anything like that is not the best idea, because at busy roads there's of course a lot of air pollution. So if you want to consume the plant, definitely don't forage on a busy road. Similar things apply to the edges of fields, because a lot of farmers of course use pesticides and a lot of chemicals, and those don't only get onto the plants that they sowed, but also onto the wild plants that might be growing on the edges of their fields. So if you want to consume those, probably not the best idea to forage there. Personally though, when I only want to use a plant in spell work, or for example in incense or something, then I usually don't take that as seriously, and I usually don't consume the plants that I forage. So I have an easier time with this. But if you do want to consume them, or you just want to be completely safe, then make sure that wherever you get the plants from is not near busy roads, or that there aren't pesticides on it or anything like that. And then you should of course know which plant you are even foraging. So definitely make sure you know your plants. There are a lot of toxic lookalikes out there, and there are also plants that have safe parts and very, very toxic plants. So for example, to my knowledge, with yew trees, the flesh of the berries is edible, whereas the seed in the middle is highly toxic. So toxic that it could kill you. So you have to really make sure you know which plant it is that you are looking at, and you have to know which parts of the plants are safe to touch, safe to consume, and safe to forage in general, because there are also plants, I think is it called photosensitive? If you touch them and then direct sunlight hits your skin, then this could burn your skin. There's a lot you have to know about the plants that you're foraging. And with that being said, I know a lot of people will scream now, oh, but there are plant ID apps. Yes, there are plant ID apps, and some of them do a better job than others. I also use them, but especially when it comes to plants that have toxic lookalikes, then you should definitely make sure not to just rely on plant ID apps, because as a software engineer who has themselves, I have once programmed an app like that. I know how hard it is and how faulty they can be. And they are. There are just plants that look so much alike that those plants won't see the difference. So you should never just trust solely a plant ID app. Make sure that you do have some local field guide that you can really trust, that you can take with you, and just make sure that you are 100% sure, especially if you want to consume parts of the plant, that you know which plant you're looking at. And if you're unsure, then just don't forage it and just buy it somewhere. It's fine. It's always better to buy a plant than to accidentally poison yourself. And of course, another part about knowing your plants before you pick them is that you of course should never pick or harvest or forage endangered plants. Some plants you just should be more careful with than others. And especially endangered plants, those you should never get any parts from. In a lot of places that's illegal. Again, you have to really make sure that you know your plants. The same applies to, for example, knowing which plants are native and which plants are invasive. Because, for example, native plants, you should always make sure to protect them as best you can. So to not over harvest, for example. Never take more than you need. Always leave as much as you can. Leave so much that the plant will survive and that it can, for example, procreate. So if you're picking flowers, for example, or only the flowers from a tree or the fruits, then never take everything. Always leave so much that the plant can procreate. If it's an invasive plant, just pick as much as you want. There are so many of them and they spread and also push native plants away. It is totally fine to just pick as many of these invasive species as you want. So knowing your way around the plants before you pick them or you take any part of them, that's very, very important. Of course, never engage in any harmful or unsustainable behavior to get to a plant. Don't cut down other plants. I think that should be common knowledge, to not litter and to, at best, leave the place better than you found it. Try to have as little impact on the environment as you can while you are foraging. You don't want to disturb wildlife. You don't want to cut down any other plants that are just in the way. You don't want to trample too many plants. Act as sustainably as you can and to have as little impact as you can, and try to maybe, while you are foraging, pick up litter. Maybe when it's very, very dry, maybe leave some water there. Maybe, again, eradicate some invasive plants. And now when it comes to actually getting the part of the plant or even the entire plant, if you don't have to take the entire plant, then make sure to leave a part of the plant that can still survive. So depending on how you cut a plant, that could damage the plant heavily, or it could leave the plant in a way where it can regrow. For example, if you have a basil plant at home and you cut it down entirely until the bottom, then of course there is no way that it can regrow. But if you leave a couple of the leaves, or at least the places, I don't know what it's called, but the places where the leaves are growing from, then from those points the plant can regrow. So make sure, if you want to get any part of a plant, that you know how to get those safely for the plant so that you don't kill the plant. And the same applies to, for example, trees. If you want to get anything from the tree, then try to make the cuts as small as you can. Maybe try to seal them with like beeswax or something afterwards. Just try to not damage the plant more than you really have to. Sometimes, if you want to get a specific part of the plant, there is no way around killing the plant. Like, for example, if you have, let's say, a small plant like a flower, like a dandelion, I don't know. People always get heated about the pronunciation in the comments. I don't care, I like dandelion. But if you, for example, want to get the root of that plant, it doesn't have a lot of root. So if you want to get the root of that plant, you will most probably kill the entire plant, and there is really no way around it. So in those cases, you can't really do anything about it. But here it is especially important to leave as many plants as you can. So really only take as much as you really, really need and you will actually use. When it comes to trying to not to hurt the plant, it's also important to use sharp knives, sharp scissors, sharp tools, and also clean tools. Every single time you get back from a foraging trip, make sure to properly clean your tools so that you won't accidentally introduce bacteria, for example, into a wound that you caused on a plant. That would suck. So make sure that your tools are always clean and sharp so that, again, you cause as little damage as you can. Alright, now that was the physical foraging etiquette, but now we're going to the spiritual foraging etiquette, and that is probably the part that most people will be unfamiliar with. I think the physical foraging etiquette is talked about a lot, of course, also outside of witchcraft circles. But the spiritual foraging etiquette, maybe that is even something that some witches and other kinds of magical practitioners have never heard about. I want to start this with a disclaimer. And the disclaimer is that that is what I do. That is what I have experienced to be the best way. A lot of people will probably see this very differently. There might be people who think I'm exaggerating, for example. Some people will think, you don't need all of that. Again, this is just my personal experience and my opinion. I have done this for a couple of years and it has worked, so that is why I do it. If you don't feel like this is necessary, then don't and see what happens, I guess. I think the most important aspect of spiritual foraging etiquette is getting permission. I know some people probably don't do that. Some people probably just go into the forest and forage. But I think it is very, very important to get the permission from either the plant or the local spirit of the area, basically, that where the plant is growing. Yes, this makes it a little bit more difficult because, of course, you have to engage with the spirit and you have to ask them, and maybe they are saying no, and then you went there and you won't be able to forage. But I think it is better to be safe and ask for permission than to just go somewhere and start foraging and then realize when you leave that you ended up angering the local spirit or even the plant spirits. So I personally wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't want to risk that. So that's why I personally always ask for permission. Who I ask always depends. Let's say I go to a tree and I want to pick some of the flowers. Then I would ask the tree spirit directly because, well, I won't be killing it and it's alive, so why should I not ask the plant spirit that I'm taking the flowers from? But if I, for example, would pick a lot of different flowers and I know, okay, by picking these flowers, I'm killing them, then I would ask the local spirit. And the same would apply if I foraged in a big forest and I'm going there and I want to forage a lot. And I don't only want to forage plants, but also dirts and maybe some stones and some sticks. And I'm in general there to get a lot of different things. Then I would most probably ask the local spirit. It always kind of depends, but it's always the plant spirit or the local spirit. And of course, if we're talking about dirts, for example, then if I'm getting grave dirt, then I would of course ask permission of the spirit of the person who's buried there. If that spirit isn't around, then again, I would turn to the local spirit, so the graveyard spirit. But now that asking for permission part is probably what people most struggle with, because not everyone has experience with spirit communication. Some people might not really know how to ask for permission. I definitely had some people ask, how the heck do I even ask for permission? How does that work? So let's get into that. First of all, you want to at least focus, like close your eyes and focus, and at best go into a light meditative state. This of course depends on what's easy for you and what isn't. For me, it's rather easy by now to go into a meditative state, but for some people that might be more of a struggle. And for those people, I recommend one thing, and that is the amazing app Aura, and also the sponsor of today's video. First of all, thank you so much to Aura for sponsoring the video. So let's quickly give it over to sponsor Bente, and then let's talk about asking for permission. Aura is a mindfulness and sleep app that has won the Best of Apple Award and is currently used by over 7 million people. It's a great all-in-one app for your sleep and well-being, with thousands of meditations, sleep stories, and so much more, like cognitive behavioral therapy, life coaching, and even breathwork. Aura's content is created by hundreds of expert coaches around the world. Its content is highly customizable, notifying you about content that has been picked specifically for you every single day. You can also create playlists of your favorite content and work on mood trackers and gratitude journals, which is a great way to track your results. At the moment, what I love most about Aura is the programs and challenges, because they help me stay on track with my daily meditations while also getting better at meditating every single day. Aura is basically like a Spotify for your mind and soul. Unlike on traditional apps that only give you a few coaches in a one-size-fits-all package, on Aura it is very easy to find a guide that resonates with you. So if you struggle with meditating daily, or if you want to enhance your meditation practice, then I challenge you to try it for 30 days. You can get started using Aura now completely for free on Aura's website by using my special link in the video description. The first 500 people using my link get a free 7-day trial and also exclusive 25% off. Okay. Let's continue talking about asking for permission. I am assuming you used Aura to meditate for like 3 to 5 minutes maybe, got into a nice, relaxed, focused, meditative state. Ideally, you feel well connected with the nature around you. The next thing that you do is call on either the local spirit or the plant spirit, but let's just assume you are in a forest and you want to call on the local spirit and ask them for permission. In which case, you call on the local spirit. You might ask yourself, how do I call on the local spirit? You don't have to do anything fancy. If you call on a local spirit, you can actually just say, I am calling on the local spirit of this forest. Come to me, I want to communicate with you, blah, blah, blah. If you want to be well prepared, of course, you can write something beforehand. I usually just wing it, because spirits are, again, usually pretty relaxed. They don't really need grand invocations or anything like that. So I just ask the local spirit to join me, and then I start talking to them. I introduce myself. I think that is very important. I tell the spirit why I am there, what my plan is. If I know already, then I tell them what I'm looking for, what I want to forage, what I will do with the plants that I'm going to forage. So if I have a specific plan, if I know that I'm using the plants in an incense blend, for example, for calm, then I will tell them, because maybe the spirit is fine with me using the plants for plan A, but not for plan B. So I'm telling them not only what I'm taking, but also what I'm going to do with it, and also which parts I'm going to be harvesting. So really just thoroughly explain what your plan is, what you're going to do, maybe flatter the spirit a little bit, tell them how many amazing plants that are growing, how beautiful the place is. And of course, if you want to be fancy, then at that point you can also offer, well, a little gift in exchange. Something like water, for example. I will get into offerings later, but if you want to, you can also at that point offer a little gift in exchange. And then you just ask for permission. So you say, okay, hi, my name is Bente. I'm here to harvest a little bit of dandelion because I want to make an oil for joy. I will make sure to not disturb the environment too much. I will make sure to pick up litter, and I also brought you a little bit of water as an offering. Would it be fine if I took some dandelion plants to make my oil with? And then you listen. The way you perceive the answer will differ from person to person. So some people like to use a pendulum or some other type of binary divination. Some people also use runes or tarot cards or oracle cards or something like that. In my opinion, those are kind of hard to interpret into a yes or no. So I would say use a binary divination method that makes things way easier. Or you can just use your psychic senses, of course, and that will again differ from person to person depending on what your skill set is. For me, I'm pretty clairsentient. So when I'm asking for permission, I usually feel either sad when it's a no, or I feel very, very lit up, very happy when it's a yes. So I really feel this emotional shift, and I also feel either a heaviness or a lightness, so more of a physical feeling as a response. So that's something that could also happen. It could also be like a tingling feeling, a warm feeling, a cold feeling. This really depends on your psychic senses. If you want to figure out which ones you should use or which ones are more active for you, then I have a video which I will link here. But yeah, that's basically what you do. It's really not that simple. You go into a light meditative state so that you're nice and connected and focused and more open to perceiving the answer. And then you talk and explain and introduce yourself, and then you ask for permission. That's really it. So what might seem daunting at first is actually pretty simple, especially if you have a very, very good meditation that you can do beforehand to get relaxed and get to a focused, connected state. And now maybe let's talk about influencing the spirit a little bit. Of course, if you are on friendly terms with the local spirit already, then it is of course more likely that the spirit says, yeah, sure, harvest here, forage here, get your dirts, your stones, your plants, no problem. And if you want to get to that place, then of course you should be nice to that spirit. Maybe, again, as I said, you give compliments to the spirit. If it's a local spirit, then the spirit probably likes to hear how amazing its place is. But offerings are a big part of that. A lot of spirits really like to get a nice offering, but it is very, very important that it's an environmentally friendly offering. I see a lot of people telling other people to give specific offerings where I'm like, no, please don't do that. Anything that has to do with salt, for example, out in nature, please don't do that. Putting bread out, for example, not a good idea, because there is a lot of things that could happen with the things that you put out, especially if it's a physical offering that you're putting there and not taking with you again. Chances are high that, for example, wildlife will try to eat it. So anything that is human processed food is really not a good idea, because wildlife could eat it, and that will hurt the animal, so don't do that. Or of course, there is a lot of things that if you introduce them to the ground, for example, that could damage the soil. Also not a good idea. I think especially when it comes to alcohol and things like that, it always really depends. I like to give a little bit of alcohol as an offering, but then I try to either like maybe just put a little drop of it on a stone or something, or on a bench or something that's there, so that I don't have to directly pour it on the ground, because I don't know how the environment, how the plants, how the soil will react to the alcohol. So anything you pour out, I would be a little bit more careful with. What I think is fine food-wise is if you know that, for example, let's say you're going to a place where there are a lot of apple trees. Then I think, for example, it's fine to maybe put out some apples. Important here though, no seeds. They may not contain any seeds anymore, because you don't want to introduce any seeds, any new plants into the environment, because that could disturb it and you don't want to do that. But if you take organic apples, you make sure to clean them first so that there's no pesticides on it. You cut them so that you can remove the seeds, and then you give that as an offering in an area that is already used to apples. I think that's fine, because even if wildlife ate those apples, it wouldn't hurt them because they already know apples. But if you take bananas there and they don't know bananas, that could hurt them. So always just be a little bit conscious about what's growing there, and then maybe if you have to give a physical offering, like some food offering, then just use something that will not hurt the wildlife there. But the thing is, you don't have to do that. I think personally, the reason why you see so many physical offerings, like food and drink offerings online, is because they are nice to show off. You can see them in photos and in videos. But there are a lot of things you can do that don't require you to add anything into the environment. For example, I think I am personally a huge fan of incense offerings, because you take something there, you burn the incense, you are basically giving the incense as an offering, the nice smell and the smoke and everything, and afterwards you take everything with you again. That is of course the important part. take your trash with you. But the thing is, you don't leave anything there. So you're able to give the offering and then take everything with you anymore, and you leave the space as it was before. Perfect. And then, of course, water, that's something that will never hurt. So if you give water, that's pretty safe. And I think an amazing offering, especially during summer when it's very dry. So water is always great. And then a last physical offering that I think works great is powders, but specifically plant powders, and not anything that contains like salts or charcoal or like sulfur or whatever you put into your powders. I would only make an herbal powder and make sure to grind it very, very thoroughly so that it is so powdery that wildlife won't be able to eat it and that it won't contain any seeds. So again, you're not introducing anything that could grow there. But that way you can sprinkle it around. Nobody will be able to eat it. Nothing can grow from it. So I think plant powders are fine as offerings. But now one thing you sadly rarely see on social media because you can't really show it is non-physical offerings. And those are amazing. Of course, those are extremely environmentally friendly because you literally don't put anything there. One amazing example is songs, music. If you can't sing and you can't play any instrument, just humming is amazing. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that, how about you write a little poem and then recite that to the spirit? Anything that revolves around your voice or around music is always an amazing offering. And it's free for you, so that's convenient. And also, again, it doesn't really get any more environmentally friendly than that. I want to really underline that non-physical offerings are so underrated. They are amazing. And then, of course, I already mentioned some other acts of devotion, like picking up trash. That's a classic, and that's always great. But then also removing invasive species, invasive plants, that's also always a great idea. You can also, if there are any organizations, for example, that are doing any work in the area of that local spirit, then you could also get engaged there or just give money to that organization, but that's less of an immediate offering. So if you need something here and now, pick up trash, remove invasive plants, sing to them, hum to them, recite a poem, bring some water, some incense, that's all great. And yeah, in my experience, this is really a great and very respectful way to forage and to not only handle the physical environment, but also the spirits that are involved. I have had great success with that and have also engaged with a lot of friendly spirits that way. That's also fun. You get to know more of your local spirits. That's great. Again, this is the way I do it. You don't necessarily have to do it. And now if you want to maybe get some motivation and some inspiration to level up your foraging game, maybe get into magical timing a little bit or anything like that, then I definitely recommend you check out my Leveling Up Your Foraging Game video up here. That being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe and give a thumbs up and ring the bell down below so that you're notified whenever I upload a new video. If you want to stay up to date with my more private shenanigans, then definitely check out my Instagram. I am planning on posting there more. And if you want to support this channel, which of course I would highly appreciate, then you should check out my Patreon and or my YouTube membership. And I will see you in another video. Bye!